My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 31 years old, and until last year, I believed loyalty was the safest investment a person could make. For 5 straight years, I gave everything to my company. Late nights, missed birthdays, canceled vacations. I was the guy they called when something broke at 2 a.m. The guy who fixed problems, quietly, while others took credit loudly. I wasn't chasing promotions. I wasn't playing office politics. I believed hard work spoke for itself. On a random Tuesday morning, my manager sent me a calendar invite titled Quick Sync. No agenda. No warning. I walked into the conference room with a coffee in my hand, still thinking about a system bug I'd stayed up all night fixing. HR was already there. That's when I knew. My manager didn't even look uncomfortable. He folded his hands and said the words that would replay in my head for months. Due to restructuring, today will be your last day. No performance warning. No severance discussion. No appreciation. Just like that. I remember nodding not because I agreed, but because my brain hadn't caught up yet. HR slid a folder across the table like they were offering me a receipt. I asked one question. Is this about my work? My manager smiled politely. It's just business. That phrase burned. They escorted me out within 15 minutes. My laptop was wiped. My badge deactivated. 5 years reduced to a cardboard box and a handshake that felt colder than the parking lot outside. What they didn't realize, what no one in that room understood, was that while they saw me as replaceable, I was the only person who truly understood the back-end infrastructure of their most valuable client. And that client? They trusted me. Not the company, not my manager, me. As I drove home that afternoon, shock slowly turned into something else. Not anger, not panic. Clarity. I wasn't fired because I failed. I was fired because they underestimated me. The first night after getting fired, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because my mind wouldn't slow down. I replayed every late night, every emergency call, every time I'd saved a project that wasn't even assigned to me. I remembered my manager taking credit during meetings, nodding while executives praised him for systems I had built. And now I was gone. By morning, reality hit harder. Rent, insurance, bills. I opened my laptop, my personal one, and checked my email. No follow-up, no thank you. Just a generic termination notice sent at 11:47 p.m., probably auto-generated. 5 years deserved an automated goodbye. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from Evan, the technical director of our biggest client. Hey Daniel, quick question. Since you're out today, who's handling the back-end migration? I stared at the screen. They hadn't told the client. Of course they hadn't. I typed carefully. I'm no longer with the company. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. What do you mean? So I explained, briefly, professionally, no emotion. There was a long pause. Then my phone rang. Evan sounded confused and irritated. You were the only one who understood our system. We specifically requested you. I didn't say anything bad about my former employer. I didn't need to. The silence said everything. Before hanging up, Evan said something that changed the direction of my life. Daniel, if you're open to it, we should talk. That afternoon, I went for a walk. No suit, no badge, just fresh air and the strange freedom of having nothing left to lose. I thought about revenge of the loud kind, the kind that burns bridges, but anger fades. Leverage doesn't. I remembered every document I'd written, every clean process I'd built, every dependency no one else fully understood. I hadn't stolen anything. I hadn't broken rules. I'd simply become essential. That evening, Evan emailed again. Can you consult for us temporarily? Just until we stabilize things. I leaned back in my chair and smiled for the first time since Tuesday. They fired me thinking I was replaceable. Meanwhile, their biggest client was asking me for help, directly. I didn't answer Evan's email right away, not because I wasn't interested, but because for the first time in years, I had power. And power deserves patience. I made coffee, sat by the window, let the silence stretch. An hour later, I replied, I'm open to consulting, short-term, independent. No desperation. No explanations. His response came within minutes. Name your rate. That question alone told me everything. I didn't lowball myself like I used to. I calculated fairly. My experience, the urgency, the risk. Then I doubled it and sent the number. I expected negotiation. Instead, Evan replied with a single line. Approved. When can you start? I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The company that fired me, without warning, had no idea their most valuable client was now paying me directly, more than I'd ever earned there. By Friday, I was officially consulting for the client. New contract. Clean terms. No non-compete violations. My lawyer confirmed it twice. Everything was legal. That's when the calls started. First, an unknown number. I ignored it. Then a voicemail. Daniel, this is Mark. We need to talk. Mark? My former manager. I deleted the voicemail. An hour later, HR emailed. Subject, urgent clarification. They suddenly wanted a conversation. Funny how I went from restructuring casualty to urgent priority in 3 days. Meanwhile, I joined my first consulting call with the client's team. Familiar systems, familiar challenges. Only difference? They listened. They asked questions. They took notes. They respected my answers. At the end of the call, Evan said something I'll never forget. We should have hired you directly years ago. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time since being fired. But the calm didn't last. Because on Monday morning, my former company discovered something terrifying. Their migration was failing. Deadlines slipping. Errors stacking up. And the one person who could fix it was no longer answering their calls. They had fired me thinking I needed them. Now they were realizing the truth. They needed me. The boardroom was silent when I finished my presentation. 12 faces on the screen, executives from different states, some curious, some skeptical, all paying attention. I laid out the facts calmly. No blame, no drama. What had gone wrong, why it happened, and exactly how to fix it. Then I explained the timeline. If these steps aren't taken, I said, the system will keep failing. Not because it's broken, but because it's being handled without full context. One board member leaned forward. And you have that context? Yes, I replied. I built it. Another pause. Then Evan spoke. To be clear, Daniel is no longer affiliated with our vendor. He's consulting independently. That's when I noticed something interesting. A few faces changed. Recognition. After the meeting ended, Evan called me privately. They want exclusivity, he said. At least for the next 6 months? I asked the obvious question. At what cost? He named the number. I didn't respond immediately. I asked for the contract in writing. An hour later, it was in my inbox. Higher pay, clear authority, direct access to decision-makers. Everything I never had before, I signed. That evening, my former company's CEO emailed me personally for the first time ever. Subject, let's talk. I didn't open it. Because at that exact moment, Evan messaged me something far more important. They're terminating the contract with your old company. I read it twice. Then a third time. 5 years of loyalty had been erased in 15 minutes. But 1 week of clarity had changed everything. The next morning, industry news broke quietly. Major client ends partnership following internal restructuring failures. No names mentioned. But I knew. And so did they. By noon, Mark called again. This time, he didn't ask for help. He asked for mercy. Mark didn't sound like a manager anymore. He sounded like someone drowning. Daniel, he said quietly, this is bigger than you think. I let him talk. The client termination had triggered a chain reaction. Budgets frozen. Projects paused. Executives asking questions no one wanted to answer. The migration failure wasn't just a technical issue anymore. It was a leadership one. We're bleeding people, Mark admitted. Morale's gone. The board wants explanations. I asked him something simple. Why are you calling me? Another pause. Because you understand the system, and the client trusts you. There it was again. Trust. The thing they'd never valued until it was gone. He made an offer. Not my old role, something custom, a short-term contract. Decent pay, no title, no authority. I declined, calmly. I'm already contracted, I said. Exclusively. His voice cracked just a little. Is there anything we can do? I thought about the cardboard box, the wiped laptop, the escort to the parking lot. No, I replied. There isn't. When I hung up, I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief. Because for the first time, I wasn't compromising my self-respect for stability. The next few weeks were intense. Long hours again, but different. Decisions were mine. When I said something was risky, it was documented. When I recommended changes, they were implemented. The system stabilized. Performance improved. Confidence returned. The client extended my contract. Then something unexpected happened. Another company reached out. Same industry, same problem. They'd heard about the turnaround. By the end of the month, I had 3 offers, all consulting, all on my terms. Meanwhile, my former company announced layoffs. Again, this time people I cared about were affected. I reached out to a few privately, offered references, advice, support, because revenge didn't mean becoming heartless. It meant choosing not to be small anymore. And as my calendar filled with meetings I controlled, I realized the truth. They didn't fire me to save money. They fired me because they didn't understand my value. Success changes how people remember you. Suddenly, my name started appearing in conversations I was never part of before. Former colleagues reached out, some with genuine congratulations, others carefully masking curiosity. How did you do it? Are you hiring? Any advice? I answered honestly, to some. But there was one email I didn't expect, from HR. My old company's HR director, the same person who slid that termination folder across the table, wanted to reconnect. She suggested lunch. I almost declined, but something told me this wasn't about closure. It was about control, or at least the illusion of it. We met at a neutral place. She smiled the same way she always had, polite, distant, rehearsed. She complimented my career trajectory, said they were proud of me. Proud. Then she made her pitch. They wanted to bring me back, and publicly this time. A symbolic hire, proof that the company still attracted top talent. Different title, more pay, flexible terms. I listened quietly. When she finished, I asked her something simple. Why didn't I deserve a warning? She hesitated. Decisions were made quickly. That's not an answer. She looked away. I declined the offer. Not angrily, not dramatically, just firmly. As we stood to leave, she said something that confirmed everything. You know, things might have been different if you'd played along more. Played along. I walked out without replying. That evening, Evan sent me an update. The client's board had approved a long-term engagement. Not just recovery, but expansion into 2 new regions. They wanted me leading the technical strategy. The next day, I hired my first employee. Then my second. People who asked questions. People who cared about quality. I built what I never had. Meanwhile, my former company announced a strategic realignment. Another euphemism. Another round of quiet exits. I didn't celebrate. I just kept building, because the real victory wasn't watching them fall. It was never needing them again. The call came late on a Thursday evening. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Daniel, this is Richard Hale. I knew the name. He was a board member, one of the people who'd approved the restructuring, the kind of executive who never spoke unless the situation was already serious. He didn't waste time. I want to be direct, he said. We made a mistake. I stayed silent. Our company is in talks to be acquired, and your former client situation has raised concerns. Concerns? He asked if I'd be willing to provide an independent assessment, confidential, paid well, strict boundaries, not help, not loyalty, insurance. I asked him why he didn't call earlier. Because we thought we could recover without you. There it was. I told him I'd consider it. After the call, I walked outside. The city was quiet, clear. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about deciding who I wanted to be. The next morning, I declined. Politely. Professionally. I wasn't interested in patching holes for a ship I'd already left. Instead, I focused on my team. We just completed a successful rollout, ahead of schedule, under budget. The client extended again. Then, an article appeared in an industry newsletter. Independent consultant leads major recovery after vendor missteps. No company names, no drama, but everyone knew. Later that week, Mark emailed one last time. Subject, I hope you're well. No request, no pitch, just that. I replied with a single sentence. I am. And I meant it, because the best revenge wasn't watching them scramble. It was building something so solid that their chaos couldn't reach me. There's a strange moment that comes after everything stabilizes. Not celebration, not relief, reflection. I caught myself waking up early again, reaching for my phone like I used to. Only this time, the notifications weren't emergencies. They were decisions, invitations, requests for input. People weren't demanding my time. They were asking for it. I remembered the version of myself who thought loyalty meant silence, who believed staying late proved commitment, who confused endurance with worth. That version of me wouldn't recognize my life now. One afternoon, I received a message from someone unexpected, a junior developer from my old team. She thanked me. Not for the work, not for the consulting, for leaving. After you were fired, she wrote. I realized how replaceable we all were to them. I stopped ignoring the red flags. She'd just accepted a better role elsewhere. That message mattered more than any headline. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a small industry panel. Nothing flashy, just professionals sharing lessons learned. Someone asked me the question everyone asks eventually. What would you have done differently? I paused. I would have paid attention sooner, I said. When respect starts fading, it's not temporary. It's a warning. After the panel, a man approached me. He introduced himself as a founder, said he'd been following my work, asked if I'd consider advising a startup. I agreed. Not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to choose environments that valued transparency over politics. That night, I passed the building where my old office used to be. The lights were off on half the floors. For the first time, I didn't feel anything. No anger, no pride, just distance. And that's when I realized something important. The story wasn't about being fired. It was about finally stepping into a life where my value wasn't debated. It was simply recognized. Success has a quiet side no one talks about. The calls slow down, the emergencies disappear, and what's left is space. Space to think, space to choose. I started turning down work, something I'd never done before. Not because I could afford to, but because I'd learned what saying yes to the wrong things cost. One request stood out. A former executive from my old company reached out privately. Not Mark, someone higher. He wanted off-the-record insight, said, he was trying to change the culture from within. I believed him. We met. He spoke honestly about fear, how leadership protected itself by eliminating dissent, how competence became threatening when it challenged comfort. You were a mirror, he said. And people don't like mirrors. I appreciated his honesty, but I didn't offer solutions, because fixing a culture that doesn't want to change isn't leadership. It's self-sacrifice. Instead, I focused inward. I wrote policies for my own company, simple ones. No silent firings, no surprise meetings, no decisions without context. Every person deserved dignity. One evening, I received an invitation to a conference, keynote. The topic? Resilience in modern workplaces. I almost laughed. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I accepted. Not to tell a revenge story, to tell a warning, because what happened to me wasn't rare. It was systemic, and if sharing it could help even one person recognize their worth sooner, it mattered. As I prepared my speech, I thought about the day I was escorted out. How small I'd felt, how disposable. That memory no longer hurt. It informed. And that's when I knew the story had shifted. It wasn't about what they took from me. It was about what I refused to give away again. The conference hall was larger than I expected. Rows of seats, soft lighting, people flipping through programs with my name printed beside the word keynote. I stood backstage listening to the muffled noise of conversation and felt something unfamiliar. Nerves, not fear, responsibility. When I stepped onto the stage, the applause was polite, curious. No one there knew the full story. They just knew the version that fit on a speaker bio. I didn't start with success. I started with the meeting, a quiet room. No agenda, an escort to the parking lot. You could feel the shift in the room when I said that. I talked about loyalty, how it's often rewarded with more work, not more respect. About how silence gets mistaken for compliance. About how many people confuse being needed with being valued. Faces nodded. I wasn't alone. After the talk, people lined up. Some thanked me. Some shared their own stories. Layoffs, humiliations, sudden endings. One man shook my hand and said, "I thought it was just me." That sentence stayed with me. Later that night, I checked my email. There was a message from HR, a different HR, a company I'd never worked for. They wanted to review their layoff policies, asked if I'd consult, not on systems, on people. I agreed. Because this was the version of success I hadn't anticipated, not revenge, impact. Meanwhile, my former company finalized its acquisition, quietly. No press release, no celebration. They survived, but they weren't the same, and neither was I. The next morning, I walked past my old office building again. This time, someone else's name was on the door. I smiled. Not because I won, but because I moved on. There's a moment that comes long after the chaos ends. When no one's watching, when nothing's urgent, when the story is finally yours. For me, it came on a quiet Sunday morning. I was sitting at my desk reviewing notes for a consulting session when I found an old notebook at the bottom of a drawer. It was from my early days at the company. Goals, ideas, pages filled with things I'd wanted to build, most of which I never got the chance to finish. I remembered how excited I'd been back then, how I believed growth meant staying put, how I thought loyalty was measured by how much discomfort I could tolerate. I closed the notebook, not with regret, with understanding. That version of me did what he knew how to do. He survived. Later that week, I got a message from Evan. The client had officially completed the expansion. Everything stable, everything profitable. They were done needing me in crisis mode. Instead, they wanted me in strategy. A long-term seat at the table, I accepted. Not because it felt like victory, but because it felt balanced. That evening, I received one final email from my former company. No apology, no request. Just an automated update removing my access from an internal alumni portal. I laughed. Some habits die hard. I deleted the email and shut down my laptop because I wasn't part of their system anymore. I was building my own. The next morning, I met with my team. We talked about growth, not aggressive, not reckless. Intentional. We talked about respect as a requirement, not a perk. And as I looked around the room, I realized something quietly powerful. I didn't need revenge. I needed alignment. And losing that job was the first honest thing that ever happened to me. A year passed faster than I expected. Not because time was moving quickly, but because for once, I wasn't counting it. My days were full but not heavy. Meetings had purpose. Work had boundaries. I traveled when I wanted, not when panic demanded it. One afternoon, I received a calendar invite that made me pause. From my former company. A public forum. Panel discussion on lessons learned from organizational change. They wanted me on stage. Not as an employee. Not as a consultant. As an example. I declined. Some stories don't need a sequel. Instead, I sent a short reply. I hope the conversation leads to better choices. That was enough. Around the same time, my firm crossed a milestone. 10 employees. All paid fairly. All informed. No surprises. We celebrated quietly. No speeches. No buzzwords. Just gratitude. Later that week, I mentored a young professional who reminded me of myself. Talented, quiet, overworked. He asked me how to survive a toxic workplace. I didn't tell him to endure. I told him to prepare. Pay attention, I said. And don't confuse patience with permission. He nodded like someone who needed to hear it. That night, I walked through the city again. The same streets I'd walked after being fired. Same buildings. Same lights, different weight. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't proud. I was free. Because the greatest shift wasn't external. It was internal. They took my job, but losing it gave me something far more valuable. The ability to choose myself. People often ask when I knew I'd truly moved on. They expect a dramatic answer. A big win. A final confrontation. But it wasn't any of those. It was a Tuesday morning. No meetings, no deadlines, just coffee and sunlight through the window. I realized I hadn't thought about my old company in weeks. Not out of avoidance, out of irrelevance. That's when it hit me. Closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you stop needing. Later that day, I received a handwritten note in the mail. Real paper, no logo. It was from a former teammate, someone who'd stayed after I left. He thanked me for setting an example. Said my departure gave him the courage to leave, too. He'd started fresh somewhere healthier. I kept that note. Not as proof, as perspective. That night, I reviewed our company's annual plan. Slow growth, sustainable clients, clear values, nothing flashy, everything intentional. I remembered how often I'd sacrificed myself for approval that never came. How I'd confused being indispensable with being respected. I wouldn't repeat that mistake. As I shut down my laptop, my phone buzzed with a message from Evan. Proud of what you've built. Simple. Honest. Earned. I replied with a thank you. Then I put my phone away, because the story had stopped needing witnesses. It had already done its work. There's a strange thing that happens when your life finally fits. You stop explaining yourself? I noticed it during conversations. I no longer justified my choices. I didn't over-prepare. I didn't wait for permission to speak. Confidence had replaced caution. Not the loud kind. The calm kind. One evening, while organizing old files, I found the termination letter again. Same cold language. Same signature. I read it once, then deleted it. Not because it hurt. Because it didn't matter. The next day, I spoke to my team about transparency, about how silence at the top creates fear at the bottom, about how people perform better when they feel safe to question decisions. They listened, and they applied it. That was the real reversal. Not power, influence. Later that week, I declined a lucrative offer. Wrong culture, right money. A year ago, I wouldn't have hesitated. Now I smiled and moved on. Because success without self-respect is just a better-looking trap. That night, I thought about the version of me who stayed quiet in that conference room. If I could speak to him now,